"Get this kid out of my courtroom before he hurts himself," Judge Vance scoffed, flicking his hand at the 15-year-old boy standing at the defense table. The courtroom exploded into laughter. It was a cruel, mocking sound that bounced off the mahogany walls. Marcus King stood there, drowning in a charcoal gray suit that was 3 sizes too big, the sleeves hanging past his fingertips. To the gallery, he looked like a joke, a poor black kid playing dress-up. But Marcus didn't flinch. He adjusted the oversized lapels, looked the judge dead in the eye, and said 4 words that silenced the room. "I'll defend my dad." The prosecutor smirked. The bailiff stepped forward. Nobody in that room took him seriously. They saw the baggy suit. They saw the trembling hands. They saw a child. But what they didn't see was the folder on the table in front of him. They didn't know that for the last 3 nights, while they slept, this boy had been sitting in a public library, uncovering a secret that the police had missed, the lawyers had ignored, and the real criminal had tried to bury. They laughed at him then. But in exactly 10 minutes, nobody would be laughing. The oversized charcoal suit hung loosely on 15-year-old Marcus King's narrow shoulders, smelling faintly of mothballs and dried lavender, a scent that reminded him of a grandfather who once told him that dignity doesn't come from a tailor, but from the spine. Marcus adjusted the lapels in the cracked hallway mirror, trying to ignore how the sleeves swallowed his hands. On the mantel behind him, a tarnished debate trophy gleamed in the soft light of the apartment, a silent testament to the voice he was still learning to use. Outside, the wind howled through the streets of Oak Springs, Ohio, rattling the thin window panes. The weatherman had issued a blizzard warning for December 20th, but inside apartment 4B, the air was thick with the savory warmth of beef stew simmering on the stove. It was a humble warmth, the kind that fought back against the drafty walls and the stack of overdue bills resting on the kitchen counter. The front door groaned open, letting in a swirl of snowflakes and a gust of biting cold. Thomas King stepped inside, stamping his worn-out boots. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deepened by a double shift at the elementary school, but his smile was instant when he saw his children. In his gloved hands, he held a scrawny, lopsided pine tree that looked like it had lost a fight with the wind. "Found it near the gym dumpster," Thomas announced, shaking snow from his coat. "A little Charlie Brown magic, right?" 7-year-old Lily looked up from her coloring book, her eyes lighting up. "It's perfect, Daddy." Marcus chuckled, finally rolling up his sleeves so his hands could actually hold a ladle. "It's bald on one side, Dad." "That's the side we put against the wall, smart guy," Thomas teased, hanging his coat. He walked over and ruffled Marcus's hair. "Look at you, Mr. Future President. That suit has a lot of history, son. Wear it proud." They sat down to dinner, the laughter flowing easily despite the storm outside. For a moment, the world felt safe. Thomas was just getting to the punchline of a joke about a squirrel and a janitor's mop when a thunderous bang on the door shattered the peace. Before anyone could move, the wood splintered. The door flew open, slamming against the wall with violent force. "Police." "Nobody move." 3 officers stormed into the tiny living room, their heavy boots tracking gray slush onto the rug. The sudden invasion of cold air and aggression sucked the warmth right out of the room. Lily screamed, dropping her fork. Thomas stood up instinctively, his hands raised, his face a mask of confusion. "Officers, please," Thomas said, his voice trembling but gentle. "There's children here. What's this about?" "If it's about the tree, I can put it back." "This ain't about a tree, kid," Officer Miller sneered, stepping forward and spinning Thomas around. "It's armed robbery. Thomas King, you're under arrest." "Robbery?" Marcus stepped forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. "My dad's been at work all day. You have the wrong person." "Back off, son," Miller barked, shoving Marcus back with a gloved hand. The force nearly knocked him into the table. With brutal efficiency, they handcuffed Thomas right there in the kitchen. The metal cuffs clicked shut, a sound that seemed to echo louder than the storm. Thomas didn't fight. He looked at Marcus, his eyes wide with fear but pleading for calm. "Marcus," Thomas said, his voice cracking as they dragged him toward the door. "Take care of Lily. It's a mistake. I'll be back. Just stay inside." "Dad!" Lily wailed, her chest hitching as an asthma attack began to set in. The officers didn't let him grab his coat. They hauled Thomas King out into the freezing whiteout, his socks soaking in the snow, treating the gentle school janitor like a dangerous criminal. Neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains, watching the spectacle, but no one came out to help. The apartment door stood wide open, the snow blowing in and burying the warmth they had just shared. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of Lily's wheezing gasps. As the police lights faded into the whiteout, Marcus held his sobbing sister and looked at his father's empty chair, making a silent vow. Dad would not spend Christmas in a cage. The county jail waiting room smelled of industrial bleach and stale coffee, a cold, chemical scent designed to scrub away hope. It was a stark contrast to the smell of old paper and possibilities that Marcus usually found in his sanctuary, the Oak Springs Public Library. He sat on a cracked plastic chair, clutching a notebook to his chest, his legs bouncing nervously inside the oversized suit trousers. Across the scratched plexiglass, his father looked smaller. The bruises on Thomas's cheek were fading into a sickly yellow, but the fear in his eyes was fresh. "Just listen to the lawyer, Marcus," Thomas whispered through the grates. "She knows best." But 10 minutes later, in a cramped office piled high with leaning towers of manila folders, Marcus wasn't so sure. Helen Ross, the public defender, looked like she hadn't slept since Thanksgiving. She rubbed her temples, her blouse stained with yesterday's mustard. "Look, kid," she said, not unkindly, but with the weary tone of someone who had lost this fight 1,000 times. "The DA is Baxter. He doesn't lose. He's offering a plea deal. 8 years. If we go to trial and lose, your dad gets 25. Minimum." "But he didn't do it," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. "The timeline is wrong. The witness is lying." "Juries believe witnesses, not timelines," Helen sighed, opening another file. 8 years means he sees you graduate college. 25 means, well, think about it. Marcus walked home through the slush, the weight of the deal crushing his shoulders. 8 years. Lily would be 15. He would be a stranger. When he arrived at apartment 4B, the door was unlocked. Panic flared for a second until he smelled it: tuna and melted cheese. Mrs. Higgins, their 70-year-old neighbor, was in the kitchen, pulling a bubbling casserole out of the oven. Lily was already at the table, coloring. "Eat," Mrs. Higgins commanded, pointing a wooden spoon at him. "A man can't think on an empty stomach." She wiped her hands on her apron and looked him in the eye. "I heard about the lawyer. Don't you let them bury a good man, Marcus King. I'll watch the little one tonight. You go do what you have to do." Marcus didn't need to be told twice. He ate a bowl of the hot, comforting tuna casserole, a taste of home that fueled his resolve, and headed back out into the cold. The Oak Springs Public Library was warm and quiet. Mrs. Gable, the stern librarian with glasses on a chain, nodded as he entered. Marcus claimed a corner computer and began to work. He didn't have a law degree, but he had something DA Baxter didn't: desperation. He pulled up the police report he'd glanced at in Helen's office. Witness: Greg Miller. Vehicle: 2018 silver sedan. He cross-referenced the license plate visible in the crime scene photos. It wasn't a private car. The prefix RNT belonged to a local budget rental agency. Marcus logged into the county's public records database. It was slow, agonizing work. The clock on the wall ticked past 8 p.m. Then 9 p.m. The library emptied out. "We're closing, Marcus," Mrs. Gable called out softly from the front desk. "Just one more minute, please," Marcus begged, his eyes burning. He clicked on the rental agreement for that specific plate number. And there it was. The rental agreement wasn't signed the day after the robbery, as Greg Miller had claimed in his statement about his car being in the shop. It was signed at 4 p.m. on December 20th. But the rental log showed the car being driven off the lot at 4:30 p.m. and crucially returned to a parking spot directly across from Joe's Market at 7:30 p.m. The robbery happened at 8 p.m. The eyewitness hadn't just been driving by. He had been parked there, waiting, for 30 minutes before the crime occurred. Marcus hit print. The whir of the machine sounded like a cannon shot in the silent room. Mrs. Gable walked over, about to scold him, but she saw the look on his face, a mixture of terror and triumph. She reached into her pocket and put a coin in the payment slot. "It's on the house, son." Marcus stepped out into the freezing night, clutching the warm folder to his chest. The wind bit at his face, but he didn't feel it. He wasn't just a kid in a baggy suit anymore. He didn't just have a hunch. He had a weapon. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B groaned as Marcus pushed them open, the sound echoing like a growl in the hushed, wood-paneled room. Every head turned. The charcoal suit felt heavier today, the oversized shoulders slipping slightly as he walked down the center aisle. To the strangers watching, he looked like a child playing dress-up in his grandfather's clothes. To Marcus, he felt like a soldier marching into a war he wasn't supposed to fight. It was the morning of December 24th. A small, pathetic plastic wreath hung crookedly behind the judge's bench, the only acknowledgement that tonight was Christmas Eve. The air in the room was thick with impatience. Everyone wanted this over. They wanted to go home to their families, their roasts, and their warm fires. Judge Vance sat high on his bench, checking his watch with irritated theatrics. He glared at the defense table where Helen Ross was frantically shuffling papers. "Ms. Ross," Judge Vance boomed, his voice deep and bored. "My docket is full. If you have a plea, enter it. If not, let's pick a jury so I can get home before Santa comes." Helen stood up, looking defeated. "Your Honor, the defense." "The defense has a motion," a voice interrupted. It wasn't Helen's. Marcus stepped out from behind the heavy wooden table. He looked tiny next to the seasoned attorneys. D.A. Baxter, wearing a festive bright red tie that looked like a smear of blood against his crisp white shirt, leaned back in his chair and chuckled. "Is this a courtroom or a daycare, Ms. Ross?" Baxter quipped, loud enough for the back row to hear. "Did you bring your intern to carry your briefcase?" The gallery erupted. It started as a few snickers, then grew into a wave of open laughter. It was a cruel, jagged sound that stripped Marcus naked. He could feel the heat rising in his cheeks, the stinging shame of being poor, of being small, of being dismissed before he had even spoken. Judge Vance didn't stop it immediately. He let it roll on for a few painful seconds, a smirk playing on his lips. Marcus gripped the edge of the table. "Dignity comes from the spine," he reminded himself. He waited. Quiet. Judge Vance finally banged his gavel, though he looked more amused than angry. "Sit down, son. Let the adults talk." Marcus didn't sit. He picked up a sheet of paper from his folder, his hand trembling just slightly. "Your Honor, under Rule 1.06 of the State Penal Code, and citing the precedent set in State v. Morrison, a defendant has the right to assistance from a family member when effective counsel is overwhelmed." The room went dead silent. The laughter was sucked out of the air as if a window had been opened. D.A. Baxter's smile froze. Judge Vance slowly lowered his gavel, leaning over the bench to get a better look at the boy in the baggy suit. "You're citing Morrison?" Vance asked, his eyes narrowing. "That's an obscure precedent, young man. You think you can practice law?" "I think I can read, Your Honor," Marcus replied, his voice gaining strength. "And I think my father deserves more than 5 minutes of attention before he gets sent away for 20 years. The judge stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. He looked at the tired public defender, then at the arrogant DA, and finally back at the boy. He saw something in Marcus's eyes, not fear, but a fire that reminded him of why he had become a judge in the first place. Or maybe he just wanted to teach the arrogant kid a lesson he'd never forget. "Fine," Vance said, sitting back. "I'll allow it. But be warned, Mr. King. This isn't a debate club. One mistake, one outburst, one procedure out of line, and I will hold you in contempt and your father will face the maximum sentence. Do you understand?" "I understand," Marcus said clearly. "Then take your seat." The laughter was gone now, replaced by a heavy, suffocating tension. Marcus walked to the defense table and sat down next to his father. Thomas reached out and squeezed Marcus's hand under the table, his rough palm shaking. "I'm ready," Marcus whispered to his dad, though his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. The game was on. Snow flurries danced against the high-arched windows of the courtroom, a stark, silent contrast to the suffocating heat of accusation building inside. It was late afternoon on Christmas Eve, and the fading light cast long shadows across the floor. Marcus sat stiffly, his hand resting on the folder containing the library documents, the weapon he hadn't used yet. He knew he had to survive this round before he could deliver the final blow. "The state calls Mr. Joseph Miller," DA Baxter announced, buttoning his expensive suit jacket with a flourish. Mr. Joe, the elderly owner of Joe's Market, shuffled to the stand. He looked frail, his hands gripping the railing as if holding onto a lifeline. He wore thick, wire-rimmed glasses that magnified his watery eyes. Under Baxter's smooth, rehearsed questioning, Joe wept quietly. He described the gun in his face, the terror of dying alone on a cold floor. "And do you see the man who robbed you in this courtroom today?" Baxter asked softly. Mr. Joe raised a shaking finger and pointed straight at the defense table. "That's him. Thomas King. He was the only black man I saw near the store all night." The jury looked at Thomas with cold eyes. A woman in the front row clutched her purse tighter. The narrative was set, a violent criminal preying on a helpless old man. "Your witness," Baxter said, smirking at Marcus as he sat down. Marcus stood up. He was too short for the podium, so he stepped out to the side, standing exposed in the open floor. He didn't attack. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke with a gentleness that surprised everyone. "Mr. Joe," Marcus said, "I'm sorry for what happened to you. I know you were scared." "I was terrified," Joe sniffed. "Sir, according to the police report, the robbery happened at 8 p.m. It was dark, wasn't it?" "Yes." "And the streetlight directly outside your front door? The city maintenance records show it was reported broken 2 weeks ago. Is that correct?" Joe hesitated. I suppose so. It was very dark." Marcus took a half step closer. "Mr. Joe, I notice you're wearing very thick glasses. You have them on now." "I'm blind as a bat without them." Joe chuckled nervously, trying to lighten the mood. "Were you wearing them that night?" Marcus asked. The question hung in the air. "The police report says your glasses were found on the counter, next to a bottle of cleaning spray. You were cleaning them when the gunman entered, weren't you?" Joe blinked, his confidence wavering. Well, yes. I had just taken them off to wipe the fog. So, in the dark, with a broken streetlight, and without your glasses." Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper that carried to the back of the room. "Did you clearly see my father's face? Or did you just see a black man in a coat?" The courtroom went deadly silent. Mr. Joe looked at Thomas, then back at Marcus. He squinted. I thought it was him. He looks familiar." "You thought?" Marcus repeated firmly. "Thank you, sir." No further questions. A ripple of murmurs went through the jury box. The perfect identification had just cracked. Reasonable doubt had entered the room. DA Baxter's face turned a shade of crimson that matched his tie. He leaned over to his assistant, his whisper hissing like steam escaping a valve. "Get Greg Miller ready. We crushed this kid. Now." The silence in the courtroom was absolute, the kind of heavy, pressurized quiet that comes right before a storm breaks. Even the dust motes seemed to hang suspended in the beam of light cutting through the window. Marcus stood at the table, his hand resting on the folder of documents he had printed at the library, the ammunition he had been saving for this exact moment. "The state calls Mr. Greg Miller," Baxter announced, his voice regaining some of its swagger. Greg Miller walked to the stand like he owned it. He was young, well-dressed in a sharp navy blazer, and exuded the confidence of a man who knew the system was on his side. He sat down, adjusted his tie, and smiled at the jury. Under Baxter's questioning, Miller painted a heroic picture. He was a concerned citizen driving by, saw a man matching Thomas's description running with a gun, and called 911 immediately. "I'll never forget his face," Miller said, looking sadly at Thomas. "It's a shame. I hate to see, people throwing their lives away." Baxter nodded solemnly. "Your witness." Marcus walked to the center of the room. He looked small against the towering witness stand, but his voice didn't waver. "Mr. Miller, you said you were driving by Joe's Market at 8 p.m. when the robbery occurred. Is that correct?" "That's right, kid," Miller smirked. "And you were in your own car?" "Yeah. My Honda." Marcus opened his folder. "That's strange. Because I have a mechanic's invoice here stating your Honda was in the shop for a transmission overhaul from December 18th to the 22nd. Miller blinked, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "Oh right. I forgot. I was in a rental. Stress makes you forget details, you know? I understand, Marcus said politely. He pulled out a second sheet of paper. I also have the rental agreement from Budget Rent-A-Car. You rented a silver sedan at 4 p.m. that day. So, is it a crime to rent a car? Miller laughed, looking at the jury for support. A few jurors chuckled. D.A. Baxter rolled his eyes. No, sir, Marcus said, his voice hardening. But it is a crime to lie under oath. Marcus turned to the judge. Your Honor, permission to play a video file obtained from the security camera of the bank across the street from Joe's Market? Baxter shot up. Objection. Ambush. Overruled, Judge Vance said, leaning forward, his eyes glued to Marcus. Play it. Marcus pressed a button on the remote. The courtroom monitors flickered to life. The grainy black and white footage showed a parking lot. This is timestamped 7:30 p.m., Marcus narrated. 30 minutes before the robbery. On the screen, a silver sedan pulled into a spot facing the market. The driver didn't get out. He sat there. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then the driver door opened. A man stepped out. He wasn't wearing a navy blazer. He was putting on a heavy, oversized coat, the same kind described by the store owner. The man on the screen opened the trunk, pulled out something dark that looked like a pistol, tucked it into his waistband, and waited in the shadows. The courtroom gasped. It wasn't a gasp of surprise. It was the sound of 100 people realizing they had been fooled. Marcus paused the video on the man's face. It was grainy, but undeniable. It was Greg Miller. Mr. Miller, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the noise. If you were just a passerby at 8 p.m., why were you parked across the street at 7:30 p.m., putting on a disguise and hiding a weapon? Miller's face drained of all color. He looked at the screen, then at Baxter, panic wild in his eyes. I didn't. It wasn't supposed to. He stammered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. I needed the money. The loan sharks, they were going to. He clamped his hand over his mouth, but the confession hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. D.A. Baxter slumped in his chair, putting his head in his hands. Judge Vance slammed his gavel down, the sound echoing like a thunderclap that shook the very foundations of the room. He pointed a shaking finger at the bailiffs, his voice booming with a fury that made everyone jump. Bailiffs, do not let that witness leave this room. Take him into custody immediately. It wasn't the gavel that signaled the end. It was the sound of steel handcuffs clicking open, a metallic ring that sounded like freedom. The courtroom was in chaos. Bailiffs were dragging a shouting Greg Miller away. D. Baxter was shoving papers into his briefcase, refusing to look anyone in the eye, his political ambitions melting faster than the snow outside. But Marcus didn't hear the noise. He only heard Judge Vance's voice, clear and final. Case dismissed with prejudice. Mr. King, you are free to go. Thomas King stood up, rubbing his wrists where the metal had bitten into his skin. He looked at his hands as if he couldn't believe they belonged to him again. Then he looked at Marcus. Before they could leave, Judge Vance cleared his throat. Mr. Marcus King, approach the bench, please. The room went quiet again. Marcus walked forward, his heart still racing. He stopped before the high wooden desk, feeling very small again. Judge Vance leaned down. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by a look of profound humility. Son, the judge said, his voice soft enough that only they could hear. When you walked in here, I saw a boy in a baggy suit. I saw a joke. I judged you by your size and your clothes, not by your mind. Vance extended a hand over the bench. I was wrong. Today, you were the only giant in this room. Your father is a lucky man. Marcus took the judge's hand. It was a firm, respectful shake. Thank you, Your Honor. Marcus turned around just in time to be engulfed in a bear hug. Thomas lifted him off the ground, burying his face in Marcus's shoulder. You saved me, Thomas sobbed, his tears soaking into the oversized charcoal lapel. You saved me, little man. They walked out of the courthouse doors and into the night. It was Christmas Eve. The blizzard had passed, leaving the town of Oak Springs covered in a pristine, glittering blanket of white. The air was crisp and clean. When they opened the door to apartment 4B, the smell of tuna casserole hit them warm, cheesy and smelling like home. Mrs. Higgins was asleep in the armchair, and Lily was curled up on the rug under the lopsided Charlie Brown tree. "Daddy!" Lily screamed, waking up and launching herself into Thomas's arms. They ate dinner together on the floor, picnic style, under the glow of the tree lights. They didn't have presents wrapped in shiny paper, and they didn't have money for a feast. But as Thomas laughed at something Lily said, his eyes crinkling in that way Marcus hadn't seen in days, Marcus knew they had everything. Later that night, Marcus went to his room. He took off the charcoal suit coat. He hung it carefully on a hanger, smoothing out the shoulders. He looked at himself in the cracked hallway mirror. He was still 15. He was still small. But the scared kid who had walked into the police station 3 days ago was gone. In his place was someone who knew the truth about dignity. It didn't come from a tailor. It didn't come from a title. It came from standing up when everyone else expected you to stay down. Marcus smiled at his reflection, turned off the light, and for the first time in 4 days, he slept. Marcus King showed us that dignity isn't found in a tailored suit, but in the courage to stand tall when the world expects you to stay down. His story is a powerful reminder that we must never judge a book by its cover, for sometimes the smallest voice carries the heaviest truth. If this story of justice and family touched your heart, please share it to remind someone else that even in the coldest winter, the warmth of truth always prevails.